Hello, everyone, and thank you for hanging out until the last day of the conference. I'm pleased to see so many people in the room. I thought there'd be 3 of us, but no. So that undepresses me. However, when I'm depressed, materialists, well, let's say when materialists are depressed, they think it's a material problem. I think it's immaterial. And I want to explain to you why I don't think depression is what people think it is. But first, a disclaimer. I am not a medical doctor. Not a medical doctor. This talk is challenging medical doctors and their typical wisdom, in quotes, about depression and how to cure it. It's meant to spark your thought process on this topic. It is not meant as medical advice. So the last sentence is the most important one. Do not discontinue taking antidepressants without first talking with your prescriber. Okay, that could be a lot of different kinds of people, all medical people, psychiatrists or others. Talk with them. And I say this to you because in any group of people, you'll find a couple, depending on the size of the group, that are on antidepressants, especially if you're in graduate school. So I had to include this disclaimer on the advice of my counsel, RG. He warned me that I should have someone representing me when I present this material. He agreed to represent me. And then I showed him my material, and this was his reaction. His head literally started to melt. Poor Rudy, poor Rudy. He gets bad coverage all the time, and then he starts melting. Sorry about that, Rudy, but you agreed. So, as an introduction, let me first say that I am addressing the simplest case of depression. That is, major depressive disorder not caused by a medical problem, a bodily problem that is, or by some other psychiatric diagnosis like bipolar disorder or PTSD. This is pure major depressive episode. No brain trauma, no hypothyroidism to blame, freestanding depression. The symptoms from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, version 5, come in 2 flavors, cognitive and bodily or vegetative symptoms. The cognitive symptoms are the ones we usually think about: depressed mood, anhedonia, which means lack of pleasure. It was also the name of my high school girlfriend. And poor Anne was not much fun. Feelings of worthlessness or guilt, impaired concentration, recurrent thoughts of death. Those are the cognitive symptoms. The physical or bodily or vegetative symptoms: weight loss or gain, insomnia or hypersomnia, psychomotor agitation or retardation, and fatigue. So you need to have 5 or more of these between the 2 groups for a formal diagnosis of major depressive disorder. But there's a crisis in the antidepressant machine. First of all, the centering didn't work for the title, but that's a separate crisis. First, the ineffectiveness of antidepressants is becoming rather famous. It's even almost admitted on television, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But many people find them ineffective, and the number of options is dwindling. And I'm going to talk about more on that subject at the end of this slide. Secondly, the lack of understanding of the etiology. The etiology is the cause of depression. We don't understand what causes depression if we're materialists. The theories as to what causes depression are continually being revised. The monoamine or serotonin hypothesis has been the most popular one in recent decades. Drugs have been designed based on the theories, and they work just as well as the drugs that were not designed based on any theory, which is to say, not so great. Third, the patents, and here we're hitting the money, and that's what really matters. The patents for these antidepressants are expiring. They've been very profitable, but now things are becoming generic, and those are cheap. So how do we know that the big pharma machine knows antidepressants have a problem? By watching TV. Why? Well, you won't notice till I point at it. My tiny red dot right there, note, watch the TV ads. If you're a chronic TV watcher like I am, you've noticed over the last 10 to 15 years a vast decrease in the number of ads for antidepressants and a concomitant decrease in the number of new antidepressants on the market. In fact, now the only antidepressants being marketed are for bipolar depression, not major depressive episode. Furthermore, you'll now notice ads that say, if your antidepressant isn't solving all your symptoms, try adding this other thing. And this other thing is usually an antipsychotic. And I can tell you, not being psychotic, that when I've been prescribed antipsychotics, I become psychotic. So I don't recommend depressed people becoming also psychotic. I don't think that's a cure for depression. I'm sorry, but psychosis doesn't cure depression. It usually makes it worse. So, TV tells you everything you need to know, almost. So, how do we come up with antidepressants to begin with? Obviously, we need rodents. Clearly, rodents are the key. Depression in humans and drug efficacy in humans are typically assessed with clinical interviews by a psychiatrist or a psychologist or associated health field, or by psychometric testing, and/or. Can you do that with a rodent? Can you give a rodent an assessment device for depression? How have you been feeling lately, Mr. Mouse? Do you feel sad? Do you feel worthless? Do you feel guilty? Do you feel like your life has no meaning? Well, you're right, because you're a mouse, but still, it's depressing. But if we can't do those kinds of things with rodents, the only other choice we've got is behavior. We have to find ways of measuring rodent behavior in situations where you expect them to be depressed. That sounds weird to say. But biologists will not be stopped. And so I'm guessing that this is pronounced Che and others in 2016 had a massive review article talking about the different ways that depression, in quotes, is induced in rodents. And the most popular method is olfactory bulbectomy. That sounds like the name of a punk rock band, but it's not. What it means is removing the olfactory bulb from the brain of the mouse and then sewing the little guy back up and putting him through tests. Why? I have a note to myself, Kenny, explain the reasoning behind this. I can't. The reasoning is that when humans lose their eyesight, which is their primary sensory modality, they become depressed. Therefore, if you remove the mouse's primary sensory modality, which is smell, they will become depressed. That's logic. That's just science. No, this reasoning does not work. But what you end up with is a mouse with half of its brain missing because the olfactory bulb is huge. So you've got a very brain-damaged mouse. Now, how do you tell whether or not you have successfully induced depression into that mouse? Anyone have an idea? Yes. But first, there's a test you have to perform. The tail suspension test. This is how you know when your mouse is depressed. Now, I'll ask you, which of these three mice is depressed? Number two? Who votes number two? Who votes none? Oh, so you all believe that one of these mice is depressed. Well, the researchers have designated number two as the depressed mouse. Can you tell me why that mouse is depressed? I mean, from the behavioral symptoms here.
He's given up.
Yes. Last time I gave this talk to a group of students, they said, well, he's just hanging there. And my response was, they're all just hanging there. What's different is that one has given up. He's no longer resisting. He's counter-revolutionary. He's given up on the original cause. He's now the enemy of the movement. Or in this case, he's the lack of movement. This is how we tell, after destroying the mouse's brain, that we have depressed the mouse. I believe it. Sure, it's obvious. And increasingly, since 1985, mice have been in suspense. You see the number of references tabulated here year by year. It only goes to 2004. So this is just the tail end of the distribution. It keeps growing. So this is just a little tiny tail on this mouse. Now many mice have lost their sense of smell and have become depressed according to the theory. But does this tell us anything? First of all, I want to give some encouragement to the mice. The last great act of defiance. You see the rapper Skinny T here. I put my red dot on him. Skinny T is giving the bird to the bird at the last second. Stand up against this, mice. But what about humans? There's no validity of this for humans. The validity is one word, none. Simple slide. So why? Why do I say that? Three things. I'll tell you why. The observable symptoms of human depression are potentially observable in a rodent. But there are only 4 such symptoms in the list. 5 or more are required for a formal diagnosis for a human. So you need at least one cognitive symptom if you've measured all 4 symptoms in the mouse as being depressive. However, we can't know what's in the mind of a mouse. We can't assess the cognitive symptoms. We can't ask the mice questions. So it's impossible to assess the cognitive side of depression. And so you're left one symptom short of a full diagnosis if you believe in this. If one argues that the rodent mind is incapable of things like thoughts of death or worthlessness or guilt, then I argue that a rodent is no model for human depression. Mice can kill themselves. And people have argued with me about that before. And I said, all the mouse has to do is go in the corner of the cage, not eat or drink for a week, and it will be dead. That's never happened. So no mouse has ever met the criteria for human depression, which includes suicidal thoughts, attempts, completions. You'll never see that in a mouse. Sorry, the mouse case is lost. Does that stop the progress of science? No. Because there are other problems when we take it into the human realm. First, the most important point, and I'm going to read this word for word. For drug candidate approval, the drug company must produce a human clinical trial with statistically significant positive results. This must be accompanied by a second source of evidence, usually another clinical trial. So if you can get 2 positive clinical trials, that is enough to go on to the next step in the testing procedure for the FDA. That means you could have run 98 previous negative trials and not reported them and put them in your file drawer. That's called the file drawer effect, and it suppresses negative results. So it looks like you're 2 for 2, but you're 2 for 100. That's proof that it didn't work. If 98% of the time it doesn't work, those 2 were statistical flukes. Secondly, the placebo effect is highly measurable in humans. You can even measure it in some animal models for some things. Let me show you the results of one single trial. The no treatment group is obviously the group you don't want to be in because this is an improvement scale. The placebo group, you see, is much, much better than no treatment at all, more than twice as good. Psychotherapy, although we don't have error bars, unfortunately, is the most effective treatment here, and I'm going to end up agreeing with that. But look at the drug effect. It rivals the psychotherapy effect, and it's still higher than the placebo effect in this trial. This is just one. But still, the placebo effect rivals the drug effect. There's a better plot that's the result of a meta-analysis, Irving Kirsch and his group. I couldn't find it to display it for you, but the placebo curve and the drug curve, the psychotherapy curve, are almost identical, and the drug curve is below them. So in general, we say placebos rival or even outperform the active drug. Further research results from Kirsch's book called The Emperor's New Drugs, which I love. I'm going to talk real fast now. He pursues the idea that side effects are key in understanding the placebo effect. And in fact, he ran a lot of experiments with different kinds of drugs that were never supposed to be antidepressants, but they did have the side effects, and they showed efficacy. The only drug that didn't had no side effects. His conclusion was that antidepressants are placebos with side effects, and the side effects trigger the belief that the drug is working. And so it's a belief-based effect. The placebo effect is belief-dependent, as are the positive results from antidepressants. And so the monoamine hypothesis, the serotonin hypothesis, is false. And there are other psychiatrists who are as radical as I am who thought of this before I did. So the mind-brain identity thesis or theory says that the mind is what the brain does. That means if your brain is depressed, your mind is depressed. But if your brain is not depressed, your mind is not depressed. No. Let's think about this. I'm going to jump one slide ahead. Oh, no, I can't do that. I should have been able to do that. The thought experiment at the bottom. Jack is engaged to Jill. Jack finds out that his roommate for 4 years has been sleeping with his roommate his girlfriend for the last 3 years, and he suddenly becomes depressed. Do you think that knowledge that he found out changed his neurotransmitter balance, and then he got depressed? Do you think it changed his brain morphology, and then he got depressed? I say no to both. The brain is the same before and after. It's his mind that's different. So through this kind of thought experiment, we can see that for a materialist, he's out of tools because he only has morphology and neurotransmitters to work with, and this doesn't explain it. So it's an anomaly from a materialist point of view. But let's leave the brain out. I often do that with myself. The implications for the M bit, as I call it, it's dead. However, there's a patch up we can do. If we consider the mind something ontologically different from the brain, but interacting with it, then we've got René Descartes' famous interactive substance dualism theory. Mind and brain are ontologically different, but are integrated and work together during physical life. When the brain dies, though, the mind does not. That's where you're supposed to boo me. The implications for the future, though, are We can give up on these drug and other kinds of treatments. Let me just speed up for 30 more seconds, including transmagnetic stimulation, electroconvulsive therapy, drugs. Give up on all of it. Instead, let's go back to how this started. Let's do talk therapy. Let's work with the mind instead of the brain. The brain is okay unless you've got a traumatic brain injury, etc. The mind is what we need to work with. That's what you do in psychotherapy. That's the answer to the question. I'm the maverick. The experts are wrong. I win. Thank you very much. I hope I have not depressed anyone, and I'm happy to take your questions.